Hey guys,
Howdy.
how y'all doing? Full disclosure,
This isn't live.
this isn't
It's
live.
Memorex. Boy, that's an old one.
I said that to my kids the other day. Actually, I was like, "Hey, is this live or is it Memorex?" And here's what I got. They just stared
They
at
didn't
me.
even say who's Ella Fitzgerald.
No, they don't. They didn't know anything, man. And then, well, I had students in class one time, and what did I say? I said something that was I referenced Lenny and Squiggy from Laverne and Shirley, and it dawned on me that that show's been off the air for way more than those kids had
Yeah.
ever even been
We
alive.
were young back then.
But well, welcome back to the podcast. Couple of things before we even get started. Don't forget to go download our app. It's out in the app stores, and it's Crucibles Fire. I actually did some upgrades on it yesterday, and put some of our social media links in there, Instagram and stuff, that we're trying to put out some more content. Some of it's going to come out on social media. Going to be publishing some of our stuff though, not out in the wild. I didn't even tell you this, but in the Facebook community, it's kind of more private, and doing some of the daily encouragement kind of stuff. I'm probably going to just start doing that over in the community. So if you, it's called the Crucibles Fire community. It is a private community where we can talk about things that doesn't go out in the wild. And so if you want to be a part of that, just send us a link on Facebook, or message, or hit me up or something like that, and I'm glad to send you an invite to that group. You can find the group, I think, if you want to search for the Crucibles Fire community and then request to join. So we want you to do that. If you're not following us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, now TikTok, which I know they're probably stealing all of our information, but that's been happening by Google for a long time. So we're probably going to get snuffed out by YouTube for saying that. But anyway, jumping in, 1 Corinthians 14. We didn't solve all of your problems last week about gifts and tongues, but today I'm sure we'll answer every question that's ever been asked, right?
Absolutely.
Yes, and we're so authoritative, right? But
Yeah,
anyway, I was fixing to look on Facebook and see how the live stream was going. It's not. But for those of you watching, it'll look the same. We're going to load it up. I'm going to be gone all weekend. Tim just came over today, and we're going to knock this out. You had some thoughts on, you want me to start with, or we just want to start reading? How did you want to start? You had some.
Tell me the thoughts you thought I had so I can remember those thoughts.
Oh, I am really just a string tied around your finger. That's all I really am.
Pretty much. Everybody's got to have a use.
What was that guy's name in It's a Wonderful Life? It had all the strings.
Oh, yeah.
His
uncle.
Uncle, whatever. No. Okay. Every time you and I talk about anything, or we teach anything ever, it always comes down to getting the bigger picture. And Tim has dubbed it Kingdom Vision, and you're probably not the first one to come up with that. Which I did a search on Kingdom Vision. There's a whole lot of guys that are a lot more famous than us put it out there, but
I got it from John the Baptist.
Okay. And I've done that a bunch in my life. I'll come up with this great idea that I think is mine. I was like, man, that's just going to change the world, and then I find that somebody's already done it.
Yeah.
And markets it and makes millions. No, but this idea of looking at not just the world, it's more than just a worldview. It's literally the filter by which we process information and understand information, of seeing things the way God sees them and dealing with things the way God deals with them.
Yeah. I feel so frustrated because I want to see things the way God sees them.
Right.
2 Corinthians, is it 2 Corinthians 2:14 or 1 Corinthians 2:14?
I don't know what you're trying to say.
Well, it says that we have the mind of Christ.
Oh,
And
gotcha.
that we can see and understand those things. But you have to back out of that a little bit. We're not God, right?
Right.
And we can even see things, or he can show us things that we just we don't know what to do with it. We're appreciative of it. We see it. feel the power of it, and it does all kinds of things to you. You know, it can shake you down to your knees, or it can make you jump up and scream Yahoo, you know, when you see it. And when I say shake you down to your knees, I'm talking about reverential stuff, not like fear and cowering kind of stuff.
Right.
Or at least that's the way I feel it. At any rate, the big picture thing, and we've talked about this 100 million times. We're so linear, we're always looking for somebody to tell us what to do.
Yeah.
And even when you think you're smart and you're intellectual and you got all this prowess, it's just the state of how we're made. And I don't necessarily think it's a fallen part.
Right.
But we'll zip into this like, is it tongues? Is it how you wear your hair? Is it, right?
Right.
So that's what we've been talking about. And everybody, I almost said everybody else on the planet keeps looking at it like that. And I don't mean that as a disrespectful statement. But we went about halfway through all this. And what we talked about today is, let's just start reading from 22, because that's about where we left off. And it's going to talk about tongues, and it's going to talk about some other things. And we're going to try to stay up above that. God, that sounds arrogant.
We're gonna stay back away from that.
Well,
the details.
We're coming from the perspective that Paul is using.
Yes.
And I know that could probably be argued.
Well, and the encouragement that we want to make as we read through these things is discipline yourself as we read and as you listen, to not go, oh, look, there it is. There's the verse.
Yep.
That's the one.
That's how we have to do it.
Make it,
and maybe it is.
But make an intentional decision to step away from that and hear what the commentary we're going to give in the perspective of the reason, and the reason Paul's writing, the way he's writing, and the point that he's trying to make.
Yeah, that's the point of all of this. But it's easy to get sunk down and all. Anyway, so.
What version are you reading in?
I can do it New American Standard, or I can do it in New Living Translation.
Couldn't care less. I just want everybody to know.
Okay, so we'll do the New American Standard, but I may switch over into New Living just a little bit on a couple of these. So verse 22, and we're going to try not to stop and comment on some of this because it's relative later on. Verse 22, so then tongues are for a sign, not to those who believe, but to unbelievers. But prophecy is a sign, not to unbelievers, but to those who believe. Now it's fixing to sound like he's countermanding himself here. Therefore, if the whole church assembles together and all speak in tongues, and ungifted men or unbelievers enter, will they not say that you're mad? You're crazy. Bunch of babbling idiots. But he just said tongues is for a sign for unbelievers.
Right.
So I'll tell you what I think that means.
Okay.
Quickly. So at Pentecost, Peter and James and John and all those guys had the Spirit fall on them. And there was a lot of Jews around there, a lot of Hebrews, but they were from different parts of the world, so they spoke different languages.
Right.
And it says that they could hear the message in their own language, but they could also look around and see that the other people were hearing it in their language.
Right. So, right.
They were able to go, wow.
Well, and there's an important kind of a side note. I don't want to run this rabbit down too much, but it's important from a cultural standpoint. And it's relevant because I heard a statement yesterday that in a worship service, we've kind of become accustomed to, while we're singing, all the lights are off, it's dark. And the premise behind that is so that I can focus on my worship. Okay?
Yeah.
And the statement was made that with all the lights on, I feel like everybody's watching me or whatever. And my immediate response was, oh yeah, let's just kill the whole corporate idea of doing it together in favor of it just being about me.
Right.
You know, and that's kind of the mindset. And that's where our culture is. People are not as concerned about what's going on in the corporate body in terms of what we're doing together as much as what did I get out of this today? Yeah. What am I doing? the reason that's significant is because it completely contradicts what you're talking about was happening in Acts 2. It wasn't just that they had received a miracle in themselves through their hearing. You're 100% right that they were watching what was going on in the corporate body around them, other manifestations of the similar or same miracle.
Yeah.
And that being able to see the Spirit manifest and things happen within the body outside of ourselves, but within the body, is extremely edifying to the body as a whole, which is going to play into what we're talking about. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense, and it does work. So the next
What'd you do?
Flip my page on accident. 22 is where we were. Yeah.
Well, you left off in 24. You're fixing to start 24.
So then it sounds like he's countermanding himself right here. He says, no, verse 23. Because he said it's a sign for unbelievers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the example that I just gave you is how they were seeing it as a sign to unbelievers. Even the unbelievers could intellectually grasp the fact that these people, that they were hearing it in their language.
Right.
And they were hearing it in their own, even though they don't know that language. So, I mean, anyway, that was a God move, and the creation knew it.
Yes.
Right? So verse 23, therefore, if the whole church assembles together, and so that I'm going to flip over in the New Living. It says, even so, if unbelievers or people who don't understand these things come into your church meeting and hear everyone speaking in an unknown language, they'll think you're crazy. So he clarifies that up just a little bit. And what he's saying is that what you guys are doing is you're trying to show off, and what you're saying are tongues, and some of them probably are, and some of them may not be. You're just trying to make it look like that.
Right.
And unbelievers are coming in and they're going, you people are nuts, because you're trying to do it so that people will see you doing it. That's the context, and the reason he's even given this deal. And so then he says in verse 24, but if all prophecy and an unbeliever or an ungifted man enters, he is convicted by all. He is called to account by all. The secrets of his heart are disclosed. This is the unbeliever. And so he will fall on his face and worship God, declaring that God is certainly among you.
Right.
So, again, it's not about the tongues and what tongues are and all that kind of stuff. He's just, remember, Paul's speaking down to a situation. He's not necessarily talking about tongues specifically, though he brings that in. And he's just saying, if it's real tongues, it can edify unbelievers. But in this place, in your worship and how you're working with each other, if you got tongues, you got to do it this way. He's going to speak some more about that later. But you want a prophecy, and you want to tell people about the word and the kingdom and that kind of stuff. So believer, unbeliever, either one is edified, and the power of the Lord goes through all that.
Well, yeah, and there's an old saying that says, keep the main thing the main thing. And it's silly, it's cheesy, it's kitschy, we get that. But that's really kind of what he's saying here. He's like, and he's telling the people at Corinth, you're getting wrapped up, and people out there watching, our churches and our denominations get just tied around the axle. You won't ever remember, but I was going to say, remind me to tell you a story later, about whether we do or don't have tongues, or whether, okay, we do, but we're not doing it right, And what he's saying here in all of this is, whether you do or whether you don't, remember what the point of them is. The point is to edify the body, to glorify God, and ultimately, through the gospel and whatever's being said, is that people will know that God's among you and he'll be praised and honored and glorified. And that's the thing. That's the main thing.
And it's not the main thing just right here. It's the main thing that comes up at the end of the passage.
Exactly.
So that's the point. Paul is speaking, I almost said Peter. Paul is bringing in bits and pieces of specifics that are going on, but he's staying up on the high end of it here, and he keeps bringing it back. It's about this. It's about this. It's about this.
Right.
Quit focusing over here. Hey, it's this.
Right.
And that means something here.
I feel like that's what I feel like when I'm trying to like train my dog not to do something stupid, you know. Hey, back over here. You know, quit chasing the mailman. Or
and I
whatever.
guess that's not necessarily a wrong thing. It's a movement of learning. We get frustrated because we already know it.
But we get the idea from him from earlier chapters that he considered he felt like they should have already been at this place.
Well, and that's what that's exactly right. You've been in it long enough. Whether you're a student of it or you're not a student of it, you have enough in there, and the Spirit has been teaching you. I would even throw in a part of that.
Oh yeah,
that,
for sure.
And you're just gaffing it off.
Well, you're reverting. It's even worse than that. I think part of the problem in his tone earlier in the book is you're reverting back to some of the stuff you've been freed out of. It's like you got saved out of the law or pagan worship, and now you're wanting to go back and put some of those elements back in and be like, what are we supposed to do? Apollos, this way, that way? What's our thing? It's just our bend and our push to put parameters and lists and formula on our worship experience.
I think it's much more based than that. It's convenient to be intellectually lazy.
Ouch. Yeah, I don't disagree.
Really,
yeah, no, I agree.
It's easier for me to come in and have some knowledge and have some opinion amongst all the eggheads that supposedly know all this stuff, but I'm not really taking it to heart or anything, and then I go out and I do my own thing. And that in itself causes a huge amount of strife.
Well, you know, and ultimately, we're going to get to this in a minute. It's about maturity. It's about living and moving in maturity. And I got a great example. I have one of my children that I will remain nameless because I've been chastised for airing their laundry out. I'll just let you, I have 7 of them, so you got a 1 in 7 chance, 1 in 6, I suppose, at this point. But figured out which one this applies to. But I've seen elements of it with all of them. Okay, and here's the deal. This particular child hates to make decisions. And so as they've grown older, it's like, hey, Dad, what do you think I should do about this? And I'm like, I don't know. What do you think you should do?
Yeah.
And the response is always like, oh, I just want you to tell me what to do. I'm like, no, I want you to learn how to make the decision. Others of my children, you know, you give them a broad parameter. Go mow the yard. Well, where do you want me to mow? How do you want me to mow? Go mow the yard. Make some decisions. And then it's like they lock up. You know, it's like, oh, I'm scared. And I don't, whether they're scared of doing it wrong, and a lot of times that may be it. They don't want to be in trouble. Or I want to do a great job, and I'm scared that I won't, and so I'm afraid that I'll make the wrong call. When I was a theater director, I would get involved in this with students. You know, that's what, Mr. Parker, how do you want me to play this part? I don't know. Do what feels right in this part with this deal. Well, should I be angry or should I be, what do you think? And they would just freak out. Just tell me.
Yeah.
That's what these people were doing to Paul.
I think that's probably a pretty good analogy.
Because you're right. It's convenient. It's easy. I never thought about that. But it's easy to just be like, have somebody else make all the decisions for you. But it doesn't help you to, when somebody's making all the decisions for you, it doesn't help you to grow.
Yeah.
It doesn't help you to deal with, it's like I watched a video the other day, a reel or something. Mike at church the other day said he likes watching TikToks because he likes watching stupid people do dumb things. and this wasn't one of those, but it was cute. It was this little bitty kid trying to climb up on this tractor, you know, because Pawpaw had, you know. I mean, he was maybe 2, and man, he was struggling. And, you know, some of the comments were like, somebody help that poor baby or whatever. No, let that baby struggle. Yeah. You know, it's even down to childbirth, you know. Yeah. The trauma of childbirth is necessary for a baby to thrive once it's born. You know, it pushes the fluid out of the lungs. It starts things happening. It literally is, the struggle is a requirement for life. And like if you do a C-section or whatever, they take the baby in a different way. There's other steps you have to do to simulate or bring that result. And so the Corinthians, I believe, are doing, you just really tripped that in my head, that I've never thought about it from those terms. It was like they're really seeking the easy way out. And he's like, no, you have the capacity. Remember, you learned that. You've got the capacity to make these decisions. You need to make these decisions, and you need to just walk in it. And instead of me giving you the easy way out. Now, he's giving them some guidance along the way here. But he's going back to, you just need to walk with the Lord. And you're always talking about was it Moses walking before the Lord? And people don't wonder, what does that mean to walk before the Lord? Do a study on it sometime. It's interesting.
And Abraham.
Abraham, maybe did I say, what did I say?
Abraham, yeah, it's Abraham. Not,
did I say
Moses works out, that works too, actually.
Well,
but he's actually spoken about in those terms with Abraham.
Yeah. And do a search on that phrase, to walk before the Lord, what it means. We don't have time today, but let's keep going.
So we're going to keep reading here. Try not to get stuck in here too much, because he's still talking about the tongues.
Mm-hmm.
But now, focus.
No, he's using tongues as an example to talk about maturity.
Because of something that they keep doing, and he's not trying to tell them how to do tongues. It's more of a frustrated explanation, I think.
And then you tell me when it's time to bring in my analogy I was talking about a while ago to illustrate it.
Well, if I knew what the analogy was.
With the rope.
Oh, right, yeah.
You'll get it in a minute, audience. Don't worry.
And you'll wait until we're ready for you to have it.
Read.
Verse 27. If anyone speaks in a tongue, it should be by 2 or at the most 3, and each in turn, and one must interpret. Again, we're not trying to talk about how to do tongues. But if there is no interpreter, he must keep silent in the church, and let him speak to himself and to God. Let 2 or 3 prophets speak, and let the others pass judgment. But if a revelation is made to another who is seated, the first one must keep silent. I'll read that in a different language. Let 2 or 3 people prophesy, and let others evaluate what is said. But if someone is prophesying and another person receives a revelation from the Lord, the one who is speaking must stop. Again, we're not talking about how you're supposed to do these things.
Well, while we're reading here, something just comes to my mind. There's a literary, I want to call it an approach that Paul takes throughout this book. And we talked about it ad nauseum before when he says, this is not the Lord's command, it's mine. He's using these if statements.
Hmm.
We've talked about it 1,000 times. People ask me questions, I say, well, it depends. He's not giving them concrete law. He's saying,
he's speaking to them in terms that you should be able to see
this
and know it.
And you should be able to see and figure it out in the moment, not as a result of my letter.
Yeah.
And he's like, and you just but read it with the way that he's writing it in and of itself is like, you can almost see, I'm a visual guy. I can see him kind of standing in the meeting room going, if there's, okay, so there's a couple of you over here with a hymn, and maybe this guy's over here with a prophecy, and if there's going to be some tongues, maybe 1 or maybe 2, if you're going to do that, be sure somebody can interpret, and because somebody may have this word of prophecy, and if while he's talking, this other guy comes up with something, well, then you're going to want to be quiet and you can just see him doing this. Yeah. He's not laying down the law. He's trying to give this picture of what it looks like to, in the moment, let the Spirit move, then to respond to that movement, and to do it without looking like a bunch of nuts.
Well, and you got to remember, he knows how to do it.
Yeah.
It's natural to him. If you put him and Peter and John and James and all those guys in the same place having church, that would just happen.
Great example.
Paul, listen, the Lord's talking to me. Yeah, hey, take it, brother.
Hey, take it, man. Well, and Tim and I have been in services where we've seen that happen.
Yeah.
When we've been down at Way of the Cross, and somebody will have a word, and they just take it, and just speak it.
And it works.
Because that's the way that it's not that it's the way it's designed.
The mentality inside of it.
Yeah, there's that. Well, and it's edification. I'm going to be careful with parsing my words here. We've set up a culture that says the only guy that has anything to say is the guy at the front of the room.
Ooh.
And that's just wrong.
It is.
It's wrong. Do they have a special gift to impart those things? Sure.
Yeah.
Is it their function in the body to shepherd through the teaching? Absolutely. But are they the priest? No. We are a priesthood of believers.
Yeah.
We all can have revelation. In fact, we're commanded via the scriptures to pursue prophecy, each of us. That each of us has a gift of the Holy Spirit that he manifests in us for the body.
Yeah.
It's not this one guy. We've done this come, sit, get consumerism stuff so long. We read this and go, all right, whose role is what? And that's just not what he's doing. He's trying to show them how to walk in the moment, in the Spirit, in maturity, without looking like a bunch of chickens with their heads cut off.
And even a level above that, he's coming at telling you should be able to figure this out on your own.
Exactly. Because you have the Spirit. That's what he's saying. You have everything. We covered that in the first half.
And as a sidebar, even ministers read this stuff and they don't get into that higher part going, man, you have this already. You just won't pursue it. We want to break down that, okay, well, if they're too stupid to do that, then we need to pull out this is how you do it. And it's obvious, and you're missing the point when you're doing that.
This is where my rope analogy needs to come in. Here's the analogy. When my wife used to teach Head Start, 3 and 4 year olds, and you have to literally, in an organized, structured environment, you get a 3-year-old in that's been at home their whole life. They're toddlers, really. I mean, they're just barely out of diapers. Sometimes they're not. You have to teach them to do everything. And one of the analogies that came to my mind is you have to teach them to walk in a line, okay, like in a straight line. And my classroom used to be next door to their building, and they would have to walk out and go to the cafeteria or whatever they were doing. And they had this trick. They have these ropes, and about every 18 inches or 2 feet, there's a loop, and they hang onto that rope. Yeah. And the leader has the rope tied around their waist, or the teacher has it or something. And it teaches them to stay in a line, okay? And it kind of works. Now, they're still spinning around, but they got that rope, and they're all going generally in the same direction. First day of school, it's crazy. They may be dragging some little kid at the end, they just don't want to walk. But by the time you get to Christmas, even 3-year-olds, man, they're walking in a line. And that's good. But by the time you get to be a 10th grader, you ought to be able to walk in a line without the rope.
Yeah.
And so the analogy that came to me a little bit ago was what Paul's saying to them is yes, I want you to walk in a line. It's good to walk in a line, but you shouldn't need the rope. And when you approach Corinthians with this idea that this is exactly the law, the rule of letter of how we're supposed to do everything, and if it's not in there, we shouldn't do it, and this is exactly it, what you're really saying is I want to go back to the rope. It's a mature believer can walk without the rope, but we have this desire to go back to walking with the rope, and it's an immature approach to the text and an immature approach to the kingdom.
And I think as ministers, we lead that mindset.
I agree.
You can drop this same thing. Forget about the Corinthians. Drop this same frustration Paul is trying to teach, not necessarily about the tongues or any of that, but the rope thing. Drop it in any church you want.
Yeah.
And when somebody supposedly gets out of line, everybody goes,
yeah,
here's your piece of the rope. You better be hanging on to it.
Yes.
And not even know they're doing it.
And it's not only an appeal to immaturity, it's binding, it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's enslaving.
Well, and the other side of that is the way you justify it is go, but that's how you're supposed to do it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, exactly. And what you're really doing is handicapping people from growth. One time when I was pastoring actively, I came in and we did the sermon at the very opening of the deal and did the music at the end. I don't even know why I did it. I don't remember if I was trying to, be relevant. I don't know. We just did it. And for the most part, everybody was like, oh, okay, this is going to be different. But there were a couple of people, they're like hemorrhaging. They're like, oh my gosh, we didn't have a song. Our heart's not prepared. It's like they couldn't do it. If you don't believe me, go into a church that's ordered and structured with liturgically, and throw the Lord's Supper at the opening of the service instead at the end, and people will flop on the floor.
Yeah. And
not because they're slaying the Spirit, but because they're just freaking out. And that's because you just took the rope away from them, and they've don't think they can still walk in a straight line, as it were. Does that make sense?
Well, we lead like that, like nobody's business. And I'm not saying, you say, oh, well, you're saying that if things start getting out of hand. I've been in a lot of churches. It's been rare that I've found things get out of hand just because of whatever. I've also been in places where some fight started or something.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the weird one off to the side. Does that mean that you don't direct people or try to do something, say, whoa, let's, I hear what you're saying, but directing and coaching and leading, sure, you may have to do that. But people will feel weird if something goes wrong.
Maybe.
But that's, if you can't handle that, maybe I should just be quiet right there.
Well, I'll take it. I'll pick it up, because here's the deal. I want y'all to look right into the camera and look right at me. Here's the deal. I want you to look right at me. What it really boils down to is trust. The reason that my wife put those kids on a rope is because she didn't trust them to do what needed to be done. Either because they didn't know, or because they didn't have the maturity and the self-discipline to continue to do what they knew. And so as leaders, when we hand people the rope, we don't trust them to grow. And ultimately, what we're showing is we don't trust God to teach them. We don't trust the Spirit to lead them. We think we have to keep them on the rope or they're going to get unruly.
But in the beginning, like you said, the rope is a tool for the teacher in that respect, because they're accountable to make sure those kids are right and safe and accounted for, right? But by Christmas time shows up, the whole dynamic has changed, and they know where they are and how they can do it. Even when the one that twirls around starts taking off the other way, they can go, hey, and they go, oh yeah, sorry.
Well, because the goal is not to have the most streamlined and ordered rope gang.
Yes.
The goal is to get them off the rope. But in church, we have put in spiritual terms that we think the goal is to have the ordered rope gang.
And how do we keep them from, we do that because we don't want them floating off into weird stuff. We're also not letting them go to watch how the Lord is working on them individually, that you may learn something from.
And I also think that leadership gets lazy because they don't want to go after them when they go off.
No, they do. They're scared. They don't know how to pursue them if it does
Okay,
go the
I'll
wrong
take
way.
that. And you know what?
And I'm not condemning anybody. I get it.
We're speaking in days, but let me bring it. That's me right there.
Yeah.
There have been people in my churches over the years that tended to go, and they were terrifying to me in some degree, because I didn't know how to deal with them. And so that's a legit concern. But man, sometimes you just got to suck it up and get into some unfamiliar territory. And that's really the whole crux of what he's talking about here. It's not about this is exactly how you do tongues or how you do prophecy or how you even do church. It's, guys, the goal here is maturity and edification of the body and seeing what's around you and walking in the Spirit. That's
just what you said. It's learning to trust the Lord is going to raise that body.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do have some responsibility, but you're not going to raise them. The Spirit is going to raise them.
And that's why the Apostle Paul could say, just do what I do. It wasn't arrogance. That was, I can't make you do this, but I know that with every fiber of my being, I'm following what he's doing. So at least we're going in the general direction. Y'all come on.
Yeah.
It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't, I'm perfect, do it exactly like me. This thing has been on my heart a long time about shadow versus reality. And Hebrews talks about the law and the tabernacle and the temple worship as being shadows. They weren't bad things. They were good things that pointed to something better and different.
Yeah.
And he, even to the point that the Mosaic law, you do it exactly this way. Here's where you put the jewels, and here's what the gold looks like. But even in that, after Jesus, that was all shadow. And in 2 Corinthians, he'll tell us to focus on the unseen things, not the seen things. The rope is a shadow. It points to something else.
Yeah.
The order that we cling to, it's not bad to have order, But we want to decide what the order is. That's the problem. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit, but the whole point is that I think a lot of the stuff that plagues the church, it plagues millennials, it's causing some people to deconstruct and move out, is that we've worshiped and thought that the end goal is the rope, the structure, the order, whatever our persuasion of the thing is, that's what we've worshiped, and we've missed the whole picture of what the edification of the body and the glorification of God is
worshiping
supposed
the
to be.
structure.
Yeah.
You're not worshiping the God that built you.
Well, it's like last week, we talked about you're worshiping the gift and not the gift giver.
Yeah. And in the big picture, we're back on that big picture thing. That's exactly what he's saying. So now let's really mess you up. Verse 33. Oh, the women are to keep silent in the churches. Praise God. Not really. For they are not permitted to speak, but are to subject themselves, just as the law also says. If they, and that's capital L, by the way, if they desire to learn anything, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it is improper for a woman to speak in church. Verse 36. Was it from you that the word of God first went forth, or has it come to you only? The other translation of that is, or do you think God's word originated with you Corinthians? Are you the only ones to whom it was given? If anyone thinks he is a prophet or spiritual, let him recognize that the things which I write to you are the Lord's commandment. But if anyone does not recognize this, he is not recognized. Now, I read all the way down to there. What does that have to do with women keeping silent in the church? Because it says it right there. The women are supposed to keep silent in the church.
Yeah.
But don't look at it like women are supposed to be silent in the church. So we're back to this same thing. The whole point of all this is you people keep doing these things so that people can see you and make you think you know the kingdom and you got all this knowledge and God is this and God is that. And all you're doing is trying to elevate yourself.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of the letter.
Right.
And so, I don't know, maybe their women were acting up. You know, there's all kinds of books written about this, that in that culture and in that church, these women were taking charge and the men weren't doing. I don't know about all
And that may be true.
And it may be. But I can promise you this. In this case, it might have been the women, and he's got some scriptural context that he can come back and say, well, but woman was created as a helpmeet of the man. I'm not dissing the women, because they were built and made, and I don't mean just to produce babies. I mean, they were built and made as a characteristic of God.
Yes.
On one side of that, and men are dealt with it on the other side of that. And I think they were going nuts in there, and he's going, you're not edifying the body because you're just more interested in hearing your own voice.
Yeah.
And so in this case, he says, if the women were the ones that were gapping and carrying on, he just said, you shut up. He would have said the same thing if the men were doing stupid stuff, I think.
I think that's the kind of the point. I mean, because you can take the same logic and apply it to, like, hey, if a guy is speaking in tongues without an interpreter, shut up.
Yes.
If 50 of you are trying to speak in tongues, shut up. If 10 of you are trying to prophesy all at the same time, shut up. That's the tone of it.
That's doing it in your own power. You're not doing it with the leading of the Spirit, because that will produce a different kind of order.
Well, and the text that people get hung on, there's two texts in this phrase, and I'm going to address them. We got to land this plane. We're almost at 40 minutes in. Verse 33 marked out in the Christian Standard says, since God is not a God of disorder, but of peace. Okay? People hang their hat on that and be like, look, God's a God of order. I'm just going to cannonball into the deep end here. That's not incorrect. And it's even brought up again in verse 40. But everything is to be done decently and in order. Here's the problem with that. People take that admonition, that truth. God is not a God of disorder. Everything should be done in order. And then they say, well, then any order I put on it is then godly. Whatever structure I put on it is good because structure in and of itself is okay. Try to tell that to some of the oppressed peoples of the world.
Mm.
It's structure, that means it's godly. No. The problem we have is we like to define what order is.
Yeah.
And the whole point of this letter is like, what's the problem? If you're going to boil it down, the problem is self-exaltation causing chaos, which was not edifying to the body. Okay? The solution is everybody shut up, be respectful, and edify the body and go with the Spirit, not with your own gut.
Yeah.
Because look what the first part, verse 33 says. Here's what it does not say. Since God is not a God of order, but of order. That's not what it says. It says he's not a God of disorder, but of peace. So the juxtaposition of the two things, the positive and the negative that he puts against each other, are disorder and peace. Not disorder and order in that particular part of the text.
No, that's right.
The two opposing forces, he's like, look, if everybody speaks at once, it's not peaceful. People are going to be anxious and offended and all of this stuff going on. And he said it's not about the order as much as it is about the peace. Does that make sense?
And later on he says that the Spirit within you, you have the ability to control that, whether you're a prophet or speaking in tongues or whatever that is.
Yes.
And then you get into that fight, but I want to say what I got to say. Well, now you got a maturity problem.
Yes.
But you have the capacity to look and say, well, maybe I can't say it right now because all this other stuff's going on, and maybe I'll be able to say it later, or maybe I won't. But in an effort to make sure that this thing is done and overall people are being edified, evidently you have the control of that gift. He says you have the control of that gift.
He says you have control of that
now
gift.
It's just an issue of whether you have to say it because you want to say it, or is it being led?
That's a whole nother episode, because we have this idea
that's the battle that he's fighting in this
yes,
whole place.
because we have this idea, well, God gave me this gift. I'm supposed to just, sorry, I should
spit my coffee.
God gave me this gift. This is from the Lord. I'm going to give it to you, whether it's that was the problem.
Yes.
And there's a spirit of self-exaltation in that.
There is.
God has given me something special, and that means what he's given me is more important than what he's given you. Yeah. And that's the problem here. And he's saying, what you guys are doing, it's not just that it's disorderly. It's not peaceful and edifying in its chaos. Yeah. And so you can bring all the order you want to it and still not have peace. I've been in situations that were so ordered I had anxiety. Because you're like, can I speak? Can I not speak? Can I blow my nose? Can I get up? Can I go to the bathroom? What if I have to twist in my chair? What if a baby cries in church? Oh my goodness, then the Holy Spirit can't move. I've literally heard preachers say if there's chairs squeaking and stuff, the Holy Spirit's not going to move because people are going to be distracted. That's the opposite end of this spectrum. You can be so ordered that there's no peace and no edification. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's humanism thinking, well, I can't think like that, so evidently the Holy Spirit can't.
It's ridiculous.
It is.
And so, to land the plane for today in chapter 14 and to get out of the podcast is and I get a little amped up about it because we go to churches, we travel, we preach, we do pulpit supply, and been in church a long time, been in other countries, we see a lot, or have seen them. See this idea, we even have it. It's called the order of worship. Mm-hmm. You go to, and I'm not poo-pooing that. You go to our church fathers had liturgy. I mean, it was responsive reading and nothing wrong with it. Yeah. And I'm not poo-pooing any of that. And it's the argument against people that, well, we're supposed to do everything with excellence. Okay, fine, do it with excellence. But the issue but you can't go to 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and say, we're supposed to have all of this structure because of 1 Corinthians 14.
Yeah.
You've taken
You're looking at it completely wrong.
You've taken what's happening. You've eisegeted 1 Corinthians 14 instead of exegeted. Yeah. And the difference in that is eisegesis is when you bring your ideas and your definitions and your concepts and lay them into the scripture instead of exegeting, which means you pull out of the scripture and let it define what you think. You're actually trying to fit the verses into doing something that the verses are not really there to do.
Yeah.
And that it really is the crux of denominational, theological, doctrinal error. That's where it starts. When you start trying to make the scriptures do something the scriptures are not trying to do.
Yeah.
Then we get into weird places and people start drinking Kool-Aid. And so, and here's the deal. You can disagree with us on this, and you can be like, you guys are a bunch of morons, fresh out of, not knowing what you're talking about. Okay, that's great. Let's have a conversation about it. We'd love to have you on the show. And talk about it, honestly, because we're not here as ultimate authority, but what we are here to do is encourage you to approach the text with kingdom vision and not with human eyes that say, this is just the... I shudder when people say this is an instruction manual for life. Yes, to some degree.
It can be. And we're not saying that you can't look at this and say, well, this tells us how to deal with tongues. Well, sure it does.
Yeah.
But that is not the premise with which the entire thing is written.
Yes. You can get
and
those.
You can't miss that.
You can get the particulars, but don't get the particulars at the expense of the larger picture.
Yeah.
Is that a good summary?
Sure is.
Get them both. I guess that's because the reason we push the larger picture so much is because it is the larger picture that gets sacrificed so often. Just don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Get your particulars, but step back and look at the larger picture. Make sense?
Yeah.
Don't forget to go download our app. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on YouTube. We're also on Spotify, Instagram, man, we're everywhere. We're everywhere.
We're culturally relevant.
I don't even know about that, but that's all I got. They got like 2 followers, but so we're apparently not relative, but we are present, even if we're not relative or irrelevant. We would like you to download the app, help us get some traction there. You're going to be speaking Sunday at
China
Grove Baptist Church.
It's their homecoming.
It's their homecoming. If you want a blessing and aren't busy, head on over to China Grove Baptist Church. Just west of Highway 19?
Yes.
Out in the China Grove community between Athens and Canton, and just north of Walton. And so Tim will be preaching there. I'm going to be speaking next Wednesday night at Cross Brand. Wednesday night doing some teaching there, and that's the only thing really on the books. I got the devotional coming up in October for Blue Letter Bible, and I'll be speaking at Mending Fences in November at Cross Brand. It's kind of it's kind of like Celebrate Recovery, I think. I'm not exactly sure the program there, but I'll be speaking, giving some testimony there coming up in November. We appreciate you. Share this thing. We love you. We appreciate you. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.